Thanks for watching our presentation on the problem with Labour's emissions trading scheme. Labour will say there's not much difference between their emissions trading scheme and a carbon tax, but they're actually being disingenuous. There are some substantial differences, but the primary one is the cost to the economy. The emissions trading scheme will be the worst economic shock to New Zealand since World War II. According to the NZIER, the short-term forecast is a $900 million hit to GDP. 22,000 jobs will be lost. By 2025, we're looking at near $6 billion today dollars hit to GDP, dairy land values down 40%, sheep and beef down 23%, and a $3,000 hit per annum to every household. At a time when Labour has spent $78 billion over and above inflation in the last 9 years to deliver us salaries that are half the Australians, and 1 in 4 children in New Zealand still in poverty, they think that it's okay to bring in that kind of an economic damage to our country. The main problem is that our businesses, while we plough ahead as world leaders, will be taking costs, but their competitors will not. In terms of world emissions, the US is 20% of the total. China is rapidly catching up, picked to leapfrog the US by next year. Together they'll be close to 40% of the world total. And what's New Zealand's? Well, New Zealand is 0.2% of the world's emissions. If you plot that on an Excel chart, that's what it looks like. The figure is so small it doesn't actually get reported. I challenge you to find the blue for New Zealand in that chart. Look at it in terms of a bottle of milk. Well, if world emissions were a bottle of milk, how much would ours be? What would our level of emissions be? 1/5 of 1 drop of a 2-litre bottle of milk would be New Zealand's emissions of greenhouse gases. So why are we doing it? Why are we taking such an economic shock to our country when the outcome is so small? Well, according to the Labour candidates running around on the huskings, it's because we're proud to be not even fast followers, but world leaders in combating climate change. New Zealand is the world leader, or as we say in IT, on the bleeding edge for combating climate change. But why? Why should we be world leaders at such a cost to our economy? Any actual emissions savings that we make will make not a blind bit of difference. By 2050, if we implement the ETS, the savings that we would contribute to temperature change are 0.001 of a percent of a degree, 0.001 of a degree. So small it's a rounding error. But the economic costs are real. Labour says that if we don't do this, then at the next round of talks, no one's going to give us credibility. You see, Labour have this kind of naive idea that, probably it was us that finished off the Cold War because we were anti-nuclear, and it was probably us that dismantled apartheid because we didn't play rugby, and we can convince the US and China just by being a world leader. We can convince them to see the light and to do the right thing because we have such a huge influence, New Zealand, on what those countries do. The second thing they say is that if we don't become world leaders, no one will want to buy our goods. But then they use food safety examples to try and justify that position. They say, look, it's happening now. A shipment of meat has been sent back from the EU for traceability reasons to Brazil. But traceability is a food safety issue. It has nothing whatsoever to do with climate change. It has to do with how do we know the meat was slaughtered in hygiene conditions? How do we know it's even beef and not kangaroo? Food has been turned back from borders for many, many decades before climate change was even a phrase on anyone's lips. And to use those examples to justify their contention is simple nonsense. Let's do a reality check here. It's a time of peak oil, global food shortages because of biofuels taking up cropland. That's expected to get worse. And Labour and the supporters of the ETS say that people are going to get really precious about buying our food. It's a TUI ad. Let's look at the benefits of a carbon tax over the ETS method. Well, it's easy to administer. You can apply it just like GST at a New Zealand source of carbon emissions or a port of entry. It's very hard to avoid or defraud such a tax, unlike the ETS, which is easy to defraud. It can be made revenue neutral and still achieve the required effects. Now what that means is, let's put $1 a litre on gas tomorrow. It's going to drive the behaviour we want, stop people driving cars, stop people generating carbon gases, but then we immediately give them a tax cut to the equivalent of $1 a litre, and there is no economic effect. There's no revenue effect. The government still gets the same amount of money it got before. People still have the same amount of money to do what they need to do, but their behaviour is being encouraged to change because we've got a revenue neutral carbon tax in place instead of an emissions trading scheme where we are sending hundreds of millions of dollars offshore, hundreds of millions of dollars to foreign countries like Russia to buy their greenhouse tax credits to make up for what we are emitting here in New Zealand. That's the big difference. Revenue neutrality and the hundreds of millions of dollars we're sending off to foreign players under the ETS. The bottom line is, ETS will increase poverty in New Zealand, which means crime and all other kind of associations with poverty are going to increase as well. More New Zealanders will leave the country than are even leaving now. 3 plane loads a week are leaving now. More are going to follow. And the effects on the economy will be even higher than estimated by the NZIER because those kind of factors are not factored into their report. A carbon tax can be made revenue neutral with no effect on poverty. If we must have something at all, let's have a carbon tax. ACT policy says, let's just take a cup of tea. Let's have a breather. Let's have a Royal Commission and have a really good think about this. Decide which way we should go. But if we must do something, be world leaders, then for goodness sakes, let's take the sensible approach and make it a revenue neutral carbon tax. Not an ETS scheme where we are paying hundreds of millions of dollars to foreign countries. Thanks. Thanks for listening. Please check out our other listings, why national voters should support ACT, why Māori should vote for ACT, and coming as soon as I get a chance to put it together, why Labour voters should vote for the ACT party. Thanks.